The eviction notice in Marcus Chen's trembling hands felt surreal as he stood in the marble-lined lobby of his childhood home's apartment building. The document bore his own signature as the new owner, but the name being evicted was one he'd once called family. His stepbrother Derek's penthouse unit would be empty within 30 days, just like the other 5 properties on Riverside Drive that Marcus had quietly acquired over the past 18 months. The same street where he'd once slept in his car after Derek and his mother had thrown him out with nothing but the clothes on his back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had always known he was different from the rest of the Chen family, not by blood, but by circumstance. When his father, Michael, married Elena Rodriguez when Marcus was 12, he'd gained not just a stepmother, but a stepbrother 3 years older who seemed to view him as an unwelcome intrusion into their perfect life. Elena was a successful real estate broker who'd built her reputation on luxury properties in the affluent neighborhoods of Portland, Oregon. Derek was her golden child, charismatic and confident, already showing signs of following in his mother's footsteps. Michael Chen had been a software engineer who'd made modest investments in tech startups during the early boom years. Nothing spectacular, but enough to provide a comfortable middle-class life for his son. When he married Elena, their combined resources elevated the family into genuine wealth. Elena's connections in real estate and Michael's tech industry insights created a powerful combination that seemed to promise security for everyone involved. Marcus thrived in his new environment initially. He was naturally gifted with numbers and technology, inheriting his father's analytical mind while developing an appreciation for Elena's business acumen. He spent afternoons after school in Elena's real estate office, learning about property values, market trends, and investment strategies. She seemed to enjoy teaching him, often remarking that he had a better head for business than Derek, who preferred the social aspects of sales over the technical details of finance and market analysis. The dynamic worked well for several years. Marcus excelled academically while Derek focused on building his social network and charm. They weren't close as brothers, but they coexisted peacefully within the family structure. Michael was proud of both boys, though he sometimes worried privately that Derek lacked the drive and discipline that Marcus displayed naturally. Elena divided her attention between her biological son and her stepson, though Marcus always sensed that Derek held a special place in her heart that he could never quite reach. Everything changed when Michael was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer during Marcus's junior year of high school. The illness progressed rapidly, and within 8 months, the family was planning a funeral instead of college visits. Michael had been the emotional anchor of their blended family, and his death exposed fractures that had been hidden beneath the surface of their seemingly stable household. Elena's grief manifested as fierce protectiveness over Derek and a gradual cooling toward Marcus. She began making comments about how Marcus reminded her too much of Michael, how seeing him was a constant reminder of her loss. Derek, perhaps sensing his mother's shift in allegiance, became increasingly territorial about family resources and planning. During family discussions about the future, Marcus found himself treated more like a temporary resident than a permanent family member. The inheritance situation was complicated by the fact that Michael's assets were primarily tied up in joint accounts, with Elena and long-term investments that wouldn't mature for several years. His will left provisions for Marcus's college education and a modest trust fund that wouldn't be accessible until he turned 25. Elena controlled most of the liquid assets, the immediate liquid assets, and the family home. She assured Marcus that his father's wishes would be honored, that he would always have a place in their family. But her actions began telling a different story. During Marcus's senior year, Elena started making changes. She redecorated Michael's home office, removing his personal items, and converting the space into a yoga studio. She began referring to family decisions as choices that she and Derek would make together, with Marcus's input being welcomed, but not particularly influential. College planning became a source of tension when Elena expressed concerns about the cost of Marcus's preferred schools, suggesting that community college might be a more practical starting point despite the family's obvious financial capacity. Derek graduated from high school that same year and enrolled in a prestigious business program at the University of Portland. Elena paid his full tuition, covered his living expenses in a luxury apartment near campus, and provided him with a generous monthly allowance. When Marcus's acceptance letter arrived from Oregon State University's computer science program, Elena's response was markedly different. She suggested student loans for most expenses and offered only minimal family support, citing the need to be more careful with finances after Michael's death. Marcus accepted the disparity without complaint, assuming it was temporary grief affecting Elena's judgment. He took out student loans, worked part-time jobs, and maintained excellent grades while Derek seemed to coast through his program with average performance but maximum family support. During holiday visits home, Marcus noticed that his presence seemed to create tension. Elena would make passive-aggressive comments about his chosen career path, questioning whether computer science was as practical as real estate or business administration. The breaking point came during Marcus's junior year of college. Elena called him into the family room for what she described as an important family discussion. Derek was home for spring break, and both of them sat across from Marcus with serious expressions. Elena explained that they'd been reviewing the family's financial situation and had decided that some difficult choices needed to be made. The trust fund that Michael had established for Marcus wouldn't be sufficient to cover his remaining college expenses, and they could no longer provide additional support. Marcus pointed out that the family's real estate business had actually grown significantly since Michael's death, with Elena's client base expanding and property values in their area increasing substantially. Derek's education and lifestyle certainly didn't reflect any financial constraints. Elena's response was cold and calculating. She explained that Derek was family in a way that Marcus had never quite been, and that her primary responsibility was to ensure her biological son's future security. The trust fund from Michael would have to be sufficient for Marcus's needs, and any additional support would be a gift rather than an obligation. The conversation took an even darker turn when Elena revealed that she'd been in contact with Michael's attorney about modifying the inheritance structure. While she couldn't directly access Marcus's trust fund, she could influence how Michael's other assets were distributed. She suggested that if Marcus wanted to maintain family relationships and ensure his trust fund remained intact, he should consider transferring to a less expensive school and reducing his financial burden on the family. Derek remained largely silent during this confrontation, but his presence felt like implicit support for his mother's position. When Marcus attempted to argue that Michael's intentions had been clear about supporting his education, Derek finally spoke up to suggest that perhaps Marcus had become too dependent on family support and needed to learn self-reliance. The statement felt like a betrayal from someone who'd never worked a day in his life and whose every expense was covered by family money. Marcus completed his junior year in a state of disbelief.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Haze of anxiety and anger. His grades remained strong, but the emotional toll of feeling unwanted and financially insecure affected every aspect of his life. He took additional part-time work and began researching scholarship opportunities, determined to complete his degree regardless of family support. During the summer break, he returned home to find that his childhood bedroom had been converted into Derek's home office, complete with expensive furniture and equipment purchased with family funds. Elena presented this change as a natural evolution of the house's use, suggesting that Marcus should consider the converted garage as his space when he visited. The garage had been partially finished as a workshop for Michael, but lacked proper heating, air conditioning, and bathroom access. The message was clear. Marcus was no longer considered a full family member with equal claim to the family home. The final semester of Marcus's junior year brought new challenges when Elena announced that she and Derek were planning to expand their real estate partnership. Derek would be graduating with his business degree and joining Elena's firm as a junior partner. They were planning to purchase several investment properties together and wanted to consolidate the resources for maximum leverage.
This consolidation would require liquidating some of Michael's remaining investments, including educational funds that had been designated for Marcus's use. Elena presented this decision as a business necessity, explaining that the real estate market was particularly favorable for expansion and that waiting would mean missing significant opportunities. She offered Marcus a choice. He could support the family's business growth and accept a reduced educational fund, or he could maintain his claim to the original inheritance but risk damaging family relationships permanently. The ultimatum was delivered with Elena's characteristic blend of emotional manipulation and business pragmatism. Marcus chose to fight for his inheritance rights, contacting Michael's original attorney and discovering that Elena's legal maneuvering was questionable but not necessarily illegal. The attorney explained that Elena had significant influence over the timing and distribution of Michael's assets, and that a legal battle would be expensive and uncertain. Marcus would likely win eventually, but the process could take years and cost more than the inheritance was worth. Meanwhile, his immediate educational needs would remain unaddressed. The situation reached its climax during Christmas break of Marcus's senior year. He returned home to find Derek hosting an expensive holiday party for his business school friends and Elena's real estate clients. The house was decorated lavishly, with catered food and premium alcohol flowing freely. Marcus felt like an outsider at his own family celebration, watching Derek play the role of successful young entrepreneur, while Elena networked with potential clients and bragged about her son's promising future in real estate. When Marcus attempted to join conversations or reconnect with family friends, he found himself subtly excluded or dismissed. Elena would redirect attention away from his computer science studies toward Derek's business accomplishments. Derek would interrupt Marcus's attempts to discuss his own projects and achievements, steering conversations back to real estate deals and market opportunities that only he and Elena fully understood. The evening's tension peaked when Elena announced to the gathered crowd that Derek would be purchasing his first investment property with family support, a duplex in a trendy neighborhood that would serve as both his residence and a rental income property. The announcement was met with congratulations and toasts, while Marcus sat silently, realizing that his trust fund had likely been redirected to finance Derek's real estate empire. After the party, Marcus confronted Elena and Derek directly about the trust fund. Elena's response was brutally honest. She had used her legal authority to redirect Michael's assets toward investments that
would benefit the entire family's long-term interests. Derek's real estate ventures would eventually generate returns that could support everyone, including Marcus, if he chose to remain part of the family business structure. Marcus pointed out that he'd never been offered a genuine role in the family business, that his computer science skills could potentially contribute to their real estate technology and marketing efforts. Derek's response revealed the true nature of their family dynamics. He explained that Marcus had always been an outsider, that Michael's marriage to Elena had been a financial arrangement as much as a romantic one, and that Marcus's continued presence was becoming a burden on their family's growth and unity. Elena supported Derek's assessment with cold business logic. She explained that blended families often faced these kinds of difficult transitions, that Marcus was old enough to establish his own independent path, and that continuing to subsidize his education and living expenses was preventing him from developing the self-reliance he would need as an adult. She offered him a final choice: accept a significantly reduced settlement from Michael's estate and maintain minimal family contact, or continue fighting for his full inheritance while being excluded from family support and relationships. Marcus chose to fight, and Elena and Derek chose to escalate their exclusion tactics. Within a week, Marcus received notice that his belongings had been packed and placed in storage, that his access to the family home was being restricted, and that any further legal action regarding his inheritance would result in complete severance of family relationships. Elena had consulted with attorneys and determined that her legal position was strong enough to withstand Marcus's challenges, especially if she was willing to spend the money necessary to drag out the proceedings. Derek delivered the final blow with characteristic cruelty. He explained that Marcus had never really been family, that Elena had tolerated him out of respect for Michael, but had always planned to prioritize her biological son's interests. He suggested that Marcus should be grateful for the years of support he'd received and accept that his time as part of their family had reached its natural conclusion. Marcus packed his essential belongings into his aging Honda Civic and drove away from the only home he'd known since childhood. He had roughly $300 in his checking account, no access to family resources, and a final semester of college to complete somehow. His trust fund was tied up in legal proceedings that his attorney had warned could take years to resolve.
Elena and Derek had effectively made him homeless while maintaining legal cover for their actions. The first few nights were spent in his car in a 24-hour parking lot near campus. Marcus showered at the university gym and ate inexpensive cafeteria food while trying to maintain focus on his final semester coursework. The psychological impact of his family's rejection was almost worse than the practical challenges of homelessness. He'd lost not just his financial support, but his entire sense of identity and belonging. Marcus applied for emergency assistance through the university and qualified for temporary housing in graduate student dormitories. The accommodations were basic but safe, giving him a stable base for completing his degree. He took additional part-time work, tutoring other students in computer science and mathematics, skills that had always come easily to him, but now became essential survival tools. The legal battle over his inheritance continued throughout his final semester, with Elena's attorneys deploying delay tactics and procedural challenges that exhausted Marcus's limited resources. His attorney explained that Elena was essentially using the family's superior financial position to wear down Marcus's resistance, hoping he would eventually accept a reduced settlement rather than continue fighting. Marcus graduated with honors in computer science, but without any family present for the ceremony. Elena and Derek had blocked his
Access to family contact information, preventing him from maintaining relationships with extended family members and family friends who might have provided support or even basic acknowledgement of his achievement. He was entirely alone in what should have been a moment of triumph and celebration. The months following graduation brought new challenges, as Marcus struggled to establish himself professionally while dealing with ongoing legal expenses and the trauma of family abandonment. He found entry-level work at a small software company in Portland, earning enough to rent a modest apartment and cover basic living expenses, but not enough to properly fund his legal battle or begin building real financial security. Elena and Derek, meanwhile, were thriving in their real estate partnership. Derek's social media presence showcased a lifestyle of luxury travel, expensive restaurants, and designer clothing funded by profits from properties purchased with Marcus's redirected inheritance. Elena's business had expanded into commercial real estate, with Derek serving as her primary assistant and heir apparent in a growing empire built partially on resources that had originally been designated for Marcus's education and future. The contrast between their success and Marcus's struggles was a constant source of pain and motivation. Marcus began dedicating his free time to studying real estate investment strategies, using his computer science background to analyze market data and identify trends that traditional brokers might miss. He discovered that his analytical skills gave him significant advantages in understanding property valuations, market cycles, and investment timing. Marcus also began tracking Elena and Derek's business activities through public records and social media, not for revenge, but for education. He studied their investment strategies, their client relationships, and their expansion plans with the methodical approach he'd once applied to computer programming. He began to understand that their success was built on leveraging other people's money and taking calculated risks with resources they didn't personally own. After 18 months of legal proceedings, Marcus's attorney finally achieved a partial victory. The court determined that Elena had exceeded her authority in redirecting Michael's assets and ordered the release of a portion of Marcus's trust fund, though significantly less than the original amount due to legal fees and Elena's previous expenditures. The settlement provided Marcus with roughly $60,000, a fraction of what Michael had originally intended, but enough to begin serious investment planning. Marcus used his settlement strategically, combining it with aggressive saving from his software job to accumulate investment capital. He spent evenings and weekends researching real estate opportunities in Portland's emerging neighborhoods, looking for undervalued properties that could be acquired and improved with minimal capital investment. His computer science background proved invaluable in analyzing market data, identifying trends, and automating much of the research process that other investors performed manually. Within 6 months, Marcus had identified his first target, a small apartment building in a transitional neighborhood that was showing signs of gentrification. The property was owned by an aging landlord who was struggling with maintenance issues and tenant management. Marcus approached the owner with a cash offer slightly below market value, but with quick closing terms and minimal contingencies. His analytical approach to the deal, combined with his technical ability to assess the property's systems and infrastructure, gave him confidence in the investment that other buyers lacked. The apartment building purchase was the beginning of Marcus's real estate empire. He applied his programming skills to property management, creating systems for tenant screening, rent collection, and maintenance scheduling that were more efficient than traditional approaches. His technical background provided a unique advantage in the tech-receiving areas of Portland,
Allowed him to identify and fix problems that other landlords would need to hire contractors to address, significantly improving his profit margins. More importantly, Marcus began using his analytical skills to identify patterns in Portland's real estate market that Elena and Derek's more traditional approach was missing. He focused on properties in neighborhoods that were likely to experience rapid appreciation due to infrastructure changes, zoning modifications, or demographic shifts. His computer science training helped him process large amounts of market data and identify opportunities that human analysis might overlook. Over the following year, Marcus reinvested his profits from the first building into 2 additional properties, each purchased with careful analysis and strategic planning. He maintained his software job for stable income while building his real estate portfolio methodically. His approach was the opposite of Elena and Derek's flashy, high-leverage strategy. Marcus focused on sustainable growth, positive cash flow, and long-term appreciation rather than quick profits and lifestyle displays. Derek and Elena remained unaware of Marcus's growing success. They had effectively erased him from their social and professional circles, and Marcus made no effort to reconnect or publicize his achievements. He continued living modestly in his small apartment while reinvesting every possible dollar into property acquisition and improvement. His lifestyle remained austere, while his net worth grew steadily through disciplined investment and reinvestment. The breakthrough moment came when Marcus discovered that Elena and Derek were planning to sell several of their investment properties to fund Derek's lifestyle and Elena's retirement plans. Public records showed that they were carrying significant debt on their properties and had been using rental income to support consumption rather than building equity. Their seemingly successful real estate empire was actually highly leveraged and vulnerable to market fluctuations. Marcus realized that their properties might become available for purchase by investors with sufficient cash and financing capacity. More intriguingly, he discovered that several of their properties were located on or near Riverside Drive, the affluent street where Elena's primary residence was located and where Derek had recently purchased his luxury penthouse apartment. The concentration of their holdings in a single prestigious area represented both their strength in local market knowledge and their vulnerability to concentrated risk. Research into the Riverside Drive area revealed that Elena and Derek weren't just investors there, but had become the dominant property owners on the street. Elena's main residence, Derek's penthouse, and their rental properties represented nearly half of the real estate on the prestigious block. They had essentially created their own little kingdom in one of Portland's most desirable neighborhoods, using a combination of Elena's market connections and Derek's social networking to control a significant portion of the area's residential real estate. Marcus began studying the financial structure underlying Elena and Derek's Riverside Drive investments. Public records showed high levels of leverage, variable rate mortgages that could become problematic if interest rates rose, and rental income that might not cover debt service if vacancy rates increased. Their empire was impressive but financially fragile, dependent on continued market appreciation and stable rental markets. The opportunity crystallized when Marcus learned through industry contacts that Elena was facing health issues that were affecting her ability to manage her business effectively. Derek was attempting to take over more responsibilities, but his social skills weren't matched by analytical abilities or business discipline. Several of their properties were experiencing maintenance problems, tenant issues, and declining profitability that Derek seemed unable to address effectively. Marcus began positioning himself strategically for potential opportunities on Riverside Drive. He established relationships with local banks,
private lenders, and investment partners who could provide financing for larger acquisitions. He studied every property on the street, analyzing ownership patterns, rental histories, and potential vulnerabilities. His approach was methodical and patient, waiting for the right moment to begin acquiring properties in the area where he'd once been made homeless. The first opportunity arose when Elena and Derek were forced to sell one of their rental properties due to cash flow problems. Derek had mismanaged tenant relationships and allowed maintenance to deteriorate,
creating problems that required significant capital investment to resolve. Rather than invest in improvements, they chose to sell quickly to a cash buyer. Marcus submitted an offer through a real estate investment company he'd established, disguising his identity while providing attractive terms that Elena and Derek couldn't refuse. The purchase was completed without Elena or Derek recognizing Marcus as the buyer. He immediately began improving the property, upgrading systems, enhancing curb appeal, and attracting higher quality tenants. The transformation was visible to other property owners on Riverside Drive and began affecting the overall perception and value of the neighborhood. More importantly, it demonstrated Marcus's capability as an investor and property manager to local real estate professionals. Over the following 6 months, Marcus acquired 2 additional properties on Riverside Drive through similar transactions. Elena and Derek continued making poor business decisions, forced into sales by cash flow constraints and management problems they couldn't solve effectively. Each acquisition strengthened Marcus's position in the neighborhood while weakening Elena and Derek's control over their former domain. Marcus's patient strategy was beginning to pay dividends as his presence on Riverside Drive became increasingly prominent. He was now the anonymous investor who was systematically acquiring and improving properties on Portland's most prestigious residential street, while Elena and Derek struggled to maintain the remaining holdings in the face of mounting financial and management challenges. The stage was set for the final phase of Marcus's plan. But first he needed to acquire the properties that would give him genuine leverage over the family that had once made him homeless. Derek's penthouse apartment and Elena's primary residence remained the crown jewels of their diminished empire, and Marcus was preparing to make them an offer they couldn't refuse. The decisive moment arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning in October when Marcus received a call from his real estate attorney informing him that Elena Rodriguez Chen had filed for bankruptcy protection. The news sent a surge of electricity through Marcus's veins as he sat in his modest downtown office, surrounded by monitors displaying property analytics and market data. Elena's real estate empire, which had once seemed invincible, was crumbling under the weight of over-leveraged investments and Derek's incompetent management. Marcus had been tracking Elena and Derek's financial deterioration through public records and industry connections for months. Their cascade of poor decisions had accelerated dramatically after Elena's diabetes diagnosis forced her to reduce her active involvement in daily operations. Derek had proven catastrophically unprepared for the responsibilities of managing a complex real estate portfolio, making rookie mistakes that would have been amusing if they weren't so financially devastating. The bankruptcy filing revealed the shocking extent of their financial mismanagement. Elena owed nearly $4 million to various creditors, including 3 major banks, 2 private lenders, and a collection of contractors and service providers who hadn't been paid for work completed months earlier. Derek's personal finances were equally disastrous, with credit card debt exceeding $200,000 and a luxury car loan that consumed 40% of his monthly income. Marcus studied the bankruptcy documents with the
methodical precision that had made him successful in both software development and real estate investment. Elena's debt structure was particularly interesting because most of her obligations were secured by properties on Riverside Drive, including her primary residence and the commercial building that housed her real estate brokerage. Derek's penthouse apartment was also listed among the assets subject to potential liquidation. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for Marcus's long-term strategy. Over the past 2 years, he had systematically acquired 6 properties on Riverside Drive, always through shell companies and investment partnerships that concealed his identity. Elena and Derek remained unaware that the mysterious investor who was transforming their neighborhood was the same stepson they had discarded and made homeless 3 years earlier. Marcus's real estate portfolio had grown to impressive proportions through disciplined reinvestment and strategic financing. His software engineering salary provided stable income, while his rental properties generated positive cash flow that he immediately reinvested into additional acquisitions. Unlike Elena and Derek's consumption-focused approach, Marcus lived frugally and treated every dollar of profit as capital for expansion rather than lifestyle enhancement. The bankruptcy proceedings would force Elena to liquidate most of her remaining properties within 6 months, creating opportunities for cash buyers who could move quickly without financing contingencies. Marcus had been preparing for exactly this scenario, building relationships with private lenders and accumulating liquid capital through strategic refinancing of his existing properties. He was positioned to act decisively when Elena's crown jewel properties became available. Derek's situation was even more precarious because his penthouse apartment was financed through Elena's business credit lines rather than traditional mortgage financing. The bankruptcy trustee would likely force a quick sale to maximize recovery for creditors, and Derek would have no legal standing to prevent or delay the transaction. His lifestyle of luxury and entitlement was about to collide with the harsh reality of financial responsibility. Marcus arranged a meeting with the bankruptcy trustee to discuss potential acquisition opportunities. He presented himself as Marcus Wong, representing Pacific Northwest Investment Partners, a legitimate real estate investment company he had established 2 years earlier. His professional credentials, strong financial position, and track record of successful property acquisitions made him an attractive potential buyer for assets that needed to be liquidated quickly. The trustee explained that Elena's primary residence, a magnificent 4-bedroom colonial on Riverside Drive, would likely be sold within 90 days. The property was valued at approximately $2.8 million, but the forced sale circumstances and Elena's desperate financial situation might allow for a purchase price significantly below market value. Derek's penthouse would be included in a package deal with Elena's commercial building, creating an opportunity for a bulk purchase that could save hundreds of thousands in transaction costs. Marcus expressed strong interest in both opportunities while maintaining his professional facade. He provided financial documentation proving his ability to complete large cash transactions and submitted preliminary offers that were below market value but attractive given the circumstances. The trustee seemed impressed by Marcus's preparedness and financial capacity, noting that most investors weren't capable of moving quickly on multiple high-value properties simultaneously. While the bankruptcy proceedings moved forward, Marcus began implementing the next phase of his strategy. He contacted directly, using his Pacific Northwest Investment Partners identity to discuss a potential private transaction for the penthouse apartment. Derek was initially resistant, clinging to hopes that Elena would find a way to avoid losing
properties, but his financial desperation gradually overcame his emotional attachment to his luxury lifestyle. Marcus offered Derek terms that seemed generous on the surface, but were actually designed to maximize Derek's psychological discomfort. He proposed purchasing the penthouse at a price that would cover Derek's debts but leave him with minimal proceeds, forcing Derek to downgrade dramatically from his accustomed lifestyle. More importantly, Marcus structured the transaction to allow Derek to remain as a tenant in the penthouse for 6 months after the sale, paying market-rate rent while searching for alternative housing. Derek accepted the offer with visible reluctance, his desperation outweighing his pride. The transaction would provide enough cash to satisfy his most pressing creditors, while giving him time to adjust to his new financial reality. Derek seemed to view the arrangement as a temporary setback, rather than a permanent change in circumstances, apparently believing he could rebuild his lifestyle once Elena's business difficulties were resolved. Elena's situation proved more complex because her emotional attachment to the family home made negotiations particularly sensitive. Marcus approached her through intermediaries, presenting offers that emphasized quick closing times and minimal contingencies rather than maximum purchase prices. Elena's failing health and mounting stress made her eager to resolve her financial crisis as quickly as possible, even if it meant accepting less than ideal terms. The breakthrough came when Elena's diabetes complications resulted in a brief hospitalization that prevented her from managing the bankruptcy proceedings effectively. Derek attempted to handle negotiations on her behalf, but his lack of business experience and legal knowledge made him easy to manipulate. Marcus's attorneys were able to structure deals that appeared fair on paper, but contained provisions that heavily favored the buyer's interests.
Within 4 months of Elena's bankruptcy filing, Marcus had successfully acquired both Elena's primary residence and Derek's penthouse apartment through his investment company. The transactions were completed at prices roughly 20% below market value, saving Marcus nearly $600,000 compared to normal market purchases. Elena and Derek received enough proceeds to satisfy their creditors and avoid criminal charges, but they were left with minimal assets and uncertain futures. The psychological impact on Elena was devastating. Losing the home where she had built her family and business empire represented more than financial failure. It symbolized the collapse of her identity and social status. She was forced to move into a modest rental apartment in a middle-class neighborhood, a dramatic downgrade from the luxury she had enjoyed for decades. Her real estate license lapsed during the bankruptcy proceedings, effectively ending her career in the industry that had defined her professional life. Derek's adjustment proved equally traumatic. The transition from penthouse owner to tenant in his former home was a daily reminder of his fall from privilege. Marcus, still operating under his investor identity, proved to be a demanding landlord who enforced lease terms strictly and required prompt payment of rent and utilities. Derek's attempts to negotiate favorable treatment were met with cold professionalism that offered no hint of their family connection. Marcus took particular satisfaction in Derek's monthly rent payments, which consumed nearly 60% of Derek's income from a sales job he had reluctantly accepted at a competing real estate firm. Derek's luxury lifestyle had evaporated overnight, replaced by the financial stress and uncertainty that Marcus had experienced during his months of homelessness. The irony was exquisite. Derek was now paying Marcus to live in the same penthouse where he had once entertained friends while Marcus slept in his car. Elena's health continued deteriorating under the stress of her changed circumstances. Her diabetes became more difficult to manage.
Manage without access to premium healthcare coverage, and the emotional trauma of losing her home and business accelerated her physical decline. She became increasingly dependent on Derek for basic support, reversing their previous relationship dynamic where she had been the dominant financial provider. Derek struggled to support both himself and his ailing mother on his modest sales income. His previous lifestyle of expensive restaurants, luxury travel, and designer clothing became impossible to maintain. He was forced to sell his luxury car and most of his designer possessions to cover basic living expenses. The social network he had cultivated during his years of prosperity gradually abandoned him as his financial situation became apparent. Marcus monitored Elena and Derek's declining circumstances through property management interactions and industry contacts. Derek's rent payments were always late, accompanied by increasingly desperate requests for payment extensions or reduced terms. Elena's medical bills were mounting, and Derek was clearly struggling to cover both their basic needs and his rental obligations to Marcus's investment company. The situation reached a crisis point when Derek requested a meeting with his landlord to discuss potential modifications to his lease terms. Marcus agreed to the meeting but maintained his false identity as Marcus Wong, curious to see how Derek would handle direct supplication to the stepbrother he had once dismissed as worthless. Derek arrived at the meeting disheveled and clearly desperate, a stark contrast to the confident young man who had once demanded Marcus accept his place as a family outsider. Derek's presentation was pathetic in its transparency. He attempted to negotiate reduced rent by emphasizing his personal connection to the property and his emotional attachment to remaining in his former home. He offered to provide property management services or maintenance work in exchange for reduced monthly payments. Most tellingly, he repeatedly referenced his family's previous prominence in Portland real estate, apparently believing that his former status entitled him to preferential treatment. Marcus listened to Derek's plea with apparent sympathy while internally savoring every moment of his stepbrother's humiliation. Derek was essentially begging for mercy from the same person he had once told would never really be family. The meeting concluded with Marcus promising to consider Derek's requests, while privately planning the final phase of his revenge strategy. Instead of offering Derek relief,
Marcus began implementing strict enforcement of lease terms that would make Derek's continued tenancy impossible. Late fees were assessed promptly and compounded daily. Property inspections revealed minor lease violations that resulted in formal warnings and cure notices. Derek's requests for maintenance or building improvements were denied or delayed indefinitely. The comfortable tenancy that Derek had initially viewed as temporary salvation gradually became a source of constant stress and financial pressure. Elena's situation worsened when her former real estate firm filed a lawsuit claiming she owed commissions and fees from transactions that had been completed before her bankruptcy. The legal action threatened to consume what little money she had retained from the sale of her properties. Derek was forced to choose between supporting his mother's legal defense and maintaining his own tenancy, creating additional strain on their already fragile relationship. Marcus had spent considerable time studying Elena and Derek's social connections, identifying the friends, business associates, and community relationships that had once provided them with status and influence. He began systematically undermining these relationships through carefully orchestrated encounters and strategic information sharing. Elena's former clients learned about her financial failures through industry gossip that Marcus helped spread. Derek's social circle gradually discovered his reduced circumstances,
Casual observations and pointed questions. The isolation was particularly brutal for Elena, whose identity had been built on her reputation as a successful businesswoman and community leader. Former friends began avoiding her, uncomfortable with her neediness and financial desperation. Professional colleagues stopped returning her calls, recognizing that she no longer had the resources or connections to provide mutual benefit. Elena found herself increasingly dependent on Derek for both financial support and emotional companionship. Derek's social decline was equally dramatic, but manifested differently. His former friends from college and the business community initially offered sympathy and occasional assistance, but their support waned as Derek's situation failed to improve. His attempts to maintain social connections despite his reduced circumstances created awkward situations where his financial limitations were obvious to everyone present. Gradually, invitations stopped coming, and Derek found himself excluded from the social network that had once defined his identity. Marcus observed these developments with satisfaction while continuing to expand his real estate holdings throughout Portland. His success had attracted attention from other investors and property developers who viewed him as a rising force in the local market. Marcus Wong had become a respected name in Portland real estate circles, known for strategic acquisitions and property improvements that enhanced entire neighborhoods. The contrast between Marcus's growing reputation and Elena and Derek's declining circumstances was stark. Marcus was featured in local business publications as an example of innovative real estate investment, while Elena and Derek struggled with basic financial survival. The family that had once dismissed Marcus as unworthy was now completely dependent on systems and opportunities that he controlled directly or influenced indirectly. Marcus's patience and strategic planning were yielding dividends beyond simple financial return. Elena and Derek were not only facing economic hardship, but experiencing the psychological trauma of social rejection and lost identity. They were learning firsthand what Marcus had experienced when they had made him homeless, the devastating combination of financial insecurity and social isolation that accompanies sudden displacement from familiar support systems. The final components of Marcus's revenge strategy were falling into place as Elena's health declined and Derek's financial situation became increasingly desperate. Both step-family members were approaching the point where they would have no choice but to accept whatever terms Marcus offered for their continued survival in Portland. The stage was set for Marcus to reveal his true identity and deliver the ultimate consequences for their treatment of him 3 years earlier. Derek's mounting rent arrears provided the perfect justification for beginning eviction proceedings. Marcus's property management company filed the necessary legal notices while maintaining strict compliance with tenant protection laws. Derek would have 30 days to cure his default or face formal eviction, a timeline that coincided perfectly with Elena's need to find new housing due to her own financial constraints. Marcus had orchestrated circumstances so that Elena and Derek would face simultaneous housing crises just as Portland's rental market was tightening due to seasonal demand and new development restrictions. Their options would be limited by their poor credit, minimal income, and lack of local references.
they would discover that finding affordable housing in Portland had become nearly impossible for people in their compromised financial situation. The beautiful irony was that Elena and Derek would soon be competing for the same limited rental opportunities that housed Portland's working poor and economically displaced residents. They would experience the housing insecurity and social stigma that Marcus had faced when they had made him homeless, but with the additional burden of their age and health conditions.
Health problems, and complete lack of experience managing financial hardship. Marcus had transformed from a homeless college graduate with a damaged family relationship into a successful real estate investor with the power to determine Elena and Derek's housing futures. The reversal of fortune was so complete that Elena and Derek remained unaware that their financial nemesis was the same young man they had once dismissed as expendable family baggage. The next phase would bring recognition, revelation, and the full weight of consequences that Elena and Derek had spent 3 years avoiding. Marcus was ready to complete his transformation from victim to victor, while ensuring that Elena and Derek understood exactly who was responsible for their current circumstances and why their treatment of him had warranted such comprehensive retribution. The eviction notice arrived on Derek's doorstep exactly 30 days after his third consecutive late rent payment, delivered by a process server who seemed apologetic about the circumstances. Derek held the legal document with trembling hands, reading the formal language that gave him 72 hours to vacate the penthouse apartment that had once been his pride and joy. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was being evicted from his own former home, though he still had no idea that his landlord was the stepbrother his family had discarded 3 years earlier. Marcus had timed the eviction proceedings to coincide with Elena's forced departure from her rental apartment, ensuring that both stepfamily members would face homelessness simultaneously. Elena's landlord had refused to renew her lease after she had fallen behind on rent due to mounting medical expenses and Derek's inability to provide adequate financial support. The coordination wasn't accidental. Marcus had quietly purchased Elena's rental building 6 months earlier through another shell company, giving him indirect control over her housing situation. Derek's frantic attempts to negotiate with his property management company proved futile. The representatives he spoke with were polite but inflexible, explaining that the eviction was proceeding according to standard procedures and that no payment arrangements or extensions were possible. Derek offered to surrender his security deposit, pay additional fees, or provide personal guarantees, but the company's position remained unchanged. He was told that the property owner had decided to renovate the unit for higher-end tenants and that his tenancy was no longer consistent with the building's repositioning strategy. Elena's deteriorating health had made her increasingly dependent on Derek for basic care and support, creating additional pressure as he searched desperately for affordable housing options for both of them. Portland's rental market had become notoriously difficult for applicants with poor credit, irregular income, or recent eviction history. Landlords were demanding first and last month's rent, plus substantial security deposits that Derek simply couldn't afford on his modest sales income. The housing crisis facing Elena and Derek was compounded by their social isolation and damaged reputations within Portland's business community. Former friends and colleagues who might have provided temporary assistance or housing referrals had distanced themselves as the family's financial troubles became widely known. Elena's former status as a prominent real estate broker now worked against her, as property managers recognized her name and associated it with bankruptcy and business failure. Derek's attempts to secure temporary housing through corporate relocation services or extended stay hotels proved equally unsuccessful. His credit score had plummeted due to late payments and defaulted loans, making him ineligible for most temporary housing options that required financial verification. The few places willing to accept cash payments demanded amounts that would exhaust Derek's remaining savings within weeks, leaving them with no resources for permanent housing solutions. Marcus monitored Derek's increasingly desperate situation through his network of property management contacts and industry connections. Their applications for rental properties were being consistently rejected, and their options were narrowing to low-income housing in unsafe neighborhoods or temporary shelters that couldn't accommodate Elena's medical needs. The housing insecurity that Marcus had experienced during his period of homelessness was now threatening Elena and Derek with far more serious consequences due to Elena's age and health complications. The revelation Marcus had been planning for 3 years finally arrived on a cold December morning when Derek appeared at the Pacific Northwest Investment Partners office requesting a personal meeting with Marcus Wong. Derek had exhausted all other options and was prepared to humble himself before his landlord in hopes of securing additional time or alternative arrangements. He arrived wearing his only remaining suit, which had become loose-fitting due to stress-related weight loss, and carrying a folder of financial documents that he hoped might demonstrate his commitment to resolving the situation. Marcus had prepared extensively for this moment, considering various approaches for revealing his true identity while maximizing the psychological impact on Derek. The office setting provided the perfect backdrop for the revelation, with Marcus positioned behind an imposing desk surrounded by evidence of his business success. Family photographs and personal items had been strategically placed to support the narrative Marcus was about to unveil. Derek entered the office with obvious nervousness, extending his hand for a handshake while beginning a rehearsed speech about his circumstances and commitment to finding solutions. Marcus allowed Derek to complete his introduction before responding with a smile that seemed familiar but couldn't quite be placed. The conversation proceeded normally for several minutes, with Derek presenting his case for extended occupancy or alternative arrangements, while Marcus listened with apparent interest and sympathy. The moment of recognition arrived when Marcus deliberately shifted his position to allow better lighting across his face while mentioning details about Derek's family history that should have been unknown to a stranger. Derek's expression gradually changed from confusion to shock as the familiar facial features and mannerisms became undeniable. The realization that Marcus Wong was actually Marcus Chen, the stepbrother his family had made homeless, hit Derek with devastating force. Derek's physical reaction was immediate and dramatic. His face drained of color, his hands began trembling uncontrollably, and his voice caught in his throat as he attempted to process the implications of Marcus's revealed identity. The successful businessman sitting across from him was the same young man Derek had dismissed as weak and dependent, the stepbrother he had told would never really be family, the person his mother had systematically cheated him out of his inheritance. Marcus allowed Derek several minutes to absorb the revelation before beginning to explain the comprehensive nature of his revenge strategy. Derek learned that Marcus owned not only the penthouse he was being evicted from, but also the building where Elena was staying, plus 6 additional properties on Riverside Drive. The mysterious investor who had been systematically acquiring and improving properties in their former neighborhood was the same person they had once considered too insignificant to warrant basic family loyalty. The financial details Marcus revealed were staggering in their scope and precision. Derek discovered that Marcus's real estate portfolio was worth over $12 million, generating monthly rental income that exceeded Derek's annual salary. The modest lifestyle Marcus maintained while building his empire contrasted sharply with the consumption-focused approach that had led to Elena and Derek's financial destruction. Marcus had achieved the kind of sustainable wealth that Elena had
spent decades pursuing through leverage and speculation. Derek's attempts to apologize or rationalize his family's previous treatment of Marcus were cut short by Marcus's calm but unforgiving assessment of their character and choices. Marcus explained that Derek and Elena's financial difficulties weren't unfortunate circumstances, but natural consequences of their values and decision-making patterns. They had prioritized short-term gratification over long-term security, treated family relationships as financial transactions, and demonstrated consistent disregard for other people's well-being. Marcus had documented every interaction, every slight, and every instance of cruelty Derek and Elena had inflicted during the period leading to his homelessness. Derek was forced to listen as Marcus recounted specific conversations where Derek had questioned Marcus's place in the family, moments when Elena had chosen Derek's interests over Marcus's basic needs, and decisions that had prioritized their comfort over Marcus's survival. The systematic nature of their rejection was laid out with the same methodical precision Marcus had applied to his real estate investments. The revelation extended beyond personal grievances to encompass the broader pattern of Elena and Derek's treatment of other people throughout their lives. Marcus had researched their business practices, social relationships, and family interactions, discovering consistent patterns of exploitation and manipulation that had harmed numerous individuals over the years. Elena's real estate clients had been overcharged and underserved. Derek's romantic relationships had been financially exploitative, and their household staff had been mistreated and underpaid. Derek's position in the office gradually shifted from supplicant to defendant as Marcus presented evidence of their broader character flaws and harmful behaviors. The eviction was no longer simply a business transaction, but a form of justice that addressed years of accumulated wrongs against Marcus and others. Derek began to understand that his current circumstances weren't temporary setbacks, but permanent consequences of fundamental character defects that Marcus had recognized and documented systematically. Marcus offered Derek a choice that paralleled the ultimatum Elena had once given Marcus regarding his inheritance and family relationships. Derek could accept immediate eviction and housing assistance that would place him and Elena in a subsidized apartment in East Portland, far from their former social circle and lifestyle. Alternatively, Derek could remain in the penthouse for an additional month while Marcus arranged for Elena to receive proper medical care and transitional housing. But only if Derek publicly acknowledged his family's treatment of Marcus and formally apologized for their actions. The public acknowledgement Marcus demanded would require Derek to contact former family friends, business associates, and social connections to explain the true circumstances behind their financial difficulties. Derek would need to admit that their current problems stemmed from their treatment of Marcus rather than market conditions or unforeseeable circumstances. The admission would destroy any remaining reputation Derek and Elena had within Portland's business and social communities. Derek's initial resistance to Marcus's terms crumbled as he considered Elena's deteriorating health and their complete lack of alternative options. The approaching Portland winter would make homelessness potentially fatal for Elena, whose diabetes and cardiovascular problems required stable housing and consistent medical care. Derek's pride and social standing were luxuries he could no longer afford when weighed against his mother's survival needs. The apology process Marcus required was comprehensive and humiliating in its scope and specificity. Derek was forced to draft letters to dozens of people explaining how his family had cheated Marcus out of his inheritance, made him homeless during his final semester of college, and systematically excluded him
from family relationships despite his father's clear intentions for inclusion. Each letter required detailed acknowledgement of specific harmful actions and explicit recognition of Marcus's character and achievements. Marcus had prepared a comprehensive dossier of evidence supporting every claim Derek would be required to make in his apologies. Financial records, legal documents, and recorded conversations provided irrefutable proof of Elena and Derek's systematic fraud and abuse. Derek couldn't minimize or rationalize their actions because Marcus had documented everything with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant building a criminal case. The social media component of Derek's required apology was particularly devastating to his remaining self-image. Derek was forced to post detailed explanations on his Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn accounts, reaching hundreds of former friends, classmates, and business contacts with admissions of his family's financial crimes and moral failures. The posts included specific examples of their treatment of Marcus and explicit recognition of Marcus's success in building a legitimate business empire despite their attempts to destroy his future. Elena's reaction to learning about Marcus's identity and role in their current circumstances was even more dramatic than Derek's had been. Her initial disbelief gave way to rage, then despair, and finally a kind of broken acceptance that their situation was permanent rather than temporary. Elena had spent months believing that their financial problems were market-related difficulties that could be overcome through persistence and networking. Learning that their nemesis was Marcus transformed their circumstances from business challenges into personal consequences.
The medical care Marcus arranged for Elena was superior to anything she could have afforded independently, but it came with conditions that reinforced her complete dependence on his charity. Elena was required to acknowledge Marcus's legal ownership of the trust fund money she had redirected and to provide written testimony detailing her methods of financial manipulation and fraud. The testimony would be held in escrow, but could be released to law enforcement if Elena violated any terms of Marcus's assistance. Marcus's terms for Elena's continued medical care included regular meetings where she would be required to account for her spending, housing arrangements, and social activities. Elena, who had once controlled every aspect of Marcus's access to family resources, now found herself subject to the same kind of micromanagement and conditional support she had imposed on him. The power dynamic had been completely reversed, with Elena's survival dependent on Marcus's continued goodwill and satisfaction with her compliance. The transitional housing Marcus provided for Elena and Derek was adequate for their basic needs, but deliberately modest in its appointments and location. The small apartment in southeast Portland was clean and safe, but represented a dramatic downgrade from their previous lifestyle and social status. The neighborhood was working class and ethnically diverse, populated by families and individuals who worked multiple jobs to afford basic housing in Portland's expensive rental market. Elena and Derek's integration into their new community was complicated by their obvious unfamiliarity with the social norms and economic realities of working-class life. Elena's attempts to maintain her previous lifestyle and social connections created awkward situations with neighbors who couldn't relate to her references to luxury travel, expensive restaurants, and business networking events. Derek's employment history in sales and real estate provided no useful skills for the service industry jobs available in their new neighborhood. Marcus monitored Elena and Derek's adjustment to their reduced circumstances through periodic check-ins and reports from social service providers involved in Elena's medical care. Their adaptation was slow and painful, marked by frequent complaints about their housing, neighborhood,
And loss of previous privileges. Neither Elena nor Derek seemed capable of accepting their new reality as permanent, or finding satisfaction in the stability and security Marcus's assistance provided. The anniversary of Marcus's original homelessness arrived with particular symbolic significance, as Elena and Derek completed their first year in subsidized housing, while Marcus expanded his real estate empire to include commercial properties and development projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. The contrast between their circumstances illustrated the long-term consequences of their very different approaches to family relationships, financial management, and personal character. Marcus's success had attracted attention from regional business publications and real estate industry organizations, leading to speaking engagements and consulting opportunities that further enhanced his reputation and influence. Marcus Wong had become a recognized authority on sustainable real estate investment and neighborhood revitalization, with particular expertise in identifying undervalued properties and improving them through strategic capital investment and professional management. Elena and Derek remained largely unaware of Marcus's growing prominence in Pacific Northwest business circles, as their social isolation and financial constraints limited their access to the professional networks where Marcus's reputation was strongest. Their former friends and business associates had moved on to new relationships and opportunities, leaving Elena and Derek effectively excluded from the communities that had once defined their identity and social status. The final component of Marcus's revenge strategy was the establishment of a charitable foundation focused on supporting young adults aging out of foster care and family systems. The foundation provided housing assistance, educational scholarships, and professional development opportunities for individuals who had experienced family rejection or abandonment, similar to Marcus's own circumstances. Elena and Derek learned about the foundation through local news coverage that prominently featured Marcus's personal story and business achievements. The Foundation's mission statement explicitly referenced the transformative power of overcoming family betrayal and building independent success despite systematic exclusion and financial abuse. Marcus's public speaking about his experience included detailed descriptions of the emotional and practical challenges facing young adults who lose family support during critical transition periods. Elena and Derek recognized their own actions reflected in Marcus's advocacy work, though he never mentioned them by name in public forums.
Marcus's charitable work brought him into contact with dozens of young people whose experiences paralleled his own journey from family rejection to independent success. Many had experienced financial abuse, social isolation, and housing instability due to family conflicts or systematic exclusion from inheritance and support systems. Marcus's foundation provided these individuals with resources and opportunities that Elena and Derek had once denied him, creating a positive legacy that transcended personal revenge. The psychological impact on Elena and Derek of witnessing Marcus's transformation into a respected philanthropist and community leader was profound and lasting. They were forced to confront the reality that the young man they had dismissed as weak and dependent had not only survived their cruelty, but had channeled it into motivation for extraordinary achievement. Marcus's success invalidated every justification they had constructed for their treatment of him, and demonstrated their fundamental misjudgment of his character and potential. Derek's attempts to rebuild his social and professional reputation were consistently undermined by the detailed public record of his family's treatment of Marcus. Potential employers, romantic partners, and social contacts could easily research Derek's background and discover the circumstances that had led to his current reduced status.
The comprehensive nature of his required apologies ensured that Derek's character flaws and harmful actions remained permanently accessible to anyone conducting basic background research. Elena's health continued declining despite the medical care Marcus's assistance made possible. The stress of her reduced circumstances, combined with the psychological trauma of recognizing her fundamental errors in judgment and character assessment, accelerated her physical deterioration. Elena's diabetes became increasingly difficult to manage, and her cardiovascular problems required frequent hospitalization that further strained Derek's ability to provide adequate support and care. Marcus's final meeting with Elena occurred in her hospital room during what would prove to be her last hospitalization. Elena was lucid enough to understand that Marcus held complete control over her medical care and housing arrangements, and that Derek's future security depended entirely on Marcus's continued willingness to provide assistance. The conversation was brief but definitive, with Elena acknowledging that Marcus had achieved justice rather than mere revenge through his systematic dismantling of their financial security and social status. Elena's death 6 months later marked the end of the family structure that had once excluded Marcus so cruelly. Derek attended the funeral alone, as their former friends and business associates had long since moved on to other relationships and commitments. Marcus sent flowers and a card expressing condolences, maintaining the professional distance that had characterized their relationship since his identity revelation. Elena was buried in a modest cemetery plot that Marcus's charitable assistance had made possible, far from the prestigious memorial gardens where she had once assumed she would be interred. Derek's solitary existence in subsidized housing continued for another year before he finally accepted Marcus's offer to relocate to a smaller city where his past would be less well known and his opportunities for rebuilding might be greater. The relocation assistance included job placement services and temporary financial support, but it required Derek to permanently leave Portland and surrender any claims to family property or relationships. Derek signed the agreement without hesitation, recognizing that his continued presence in Portland would only serve as a constant reminder of his family's failures and his personal dependence on Marcus's charity. Marcus watched Derek's departure with a mixture of satisfaction and melancholy, recognizing that his comprehensive revenge had achieved its intended goals while exacting psychological costs on himself as well. The systematic destruction of Elena and Derek's financial security and social status had required years of patient planning and emotional discipline that had shaped Marcus's character in ways both positive and concerning. His success had been built partially on motivation derived from anger and resentment, emotions that had served their purpose but needed to be transformed into more constructive drives. The real estate empire Marcus had built during his quest for revenge became the foundation for legitimate business expansion and community development that extended far beyond personal vendettas. Marcus's companies began focusing on affordable housing development, neighborhood revitalization projects,
and sustainable urban planning initiatives that created positive value for Portland's broader community. The analytical skills and strategic thinking that had enabled his revenge against Elena and Derek proved equally effective when applied to constructive purposes. Marcus's personal relationships gradually evolved beyond the protective isolation he had maintained during his years of strategic planning and empire building. The trust issues created by Elena and Derek's betrayal required professional counseling and conscious effort to overcome. But Marcus eventually developed friendships and romantic relationships based on mutual respect rather than strategic advantage.
Charitable work brought him into contact with individuals who valued his character and achievements without knowledge of his family history or revenge motivations. The foundation Marcus established grew into a significant regional organization that provided services to hundreds of young adults annually. The programs included not only direct financial assistance, but also mentorship, professional development, and emotional support services that addressed the comprehensive needs of individuals recovering from family trauma and systematic exclusion. Marcus's personal story became a source of inspiration and practical guidance for Foundation clients who faced similar challenges in building independent success despite family opposition. 5 years after Derek's departure from Portland, Marcus received a letter from his former stepbrother describing his new life in a small Oregon coastal town. Derek had found employment as a property maintenance supervisor and was engaged to a woman who knew nothing about his family history or previous lifestyle. The letter expressed gratitude for Marcus's assistance and acknowledged that Derek's current happiness would have been impossible without the forced character development that had resulted from losing his unearned privileges and social status. Marcus responded to Derek's letter with a brief note expressing hope for his continued success and personal growth. The correspondence marked a final closure to their family relationship that had begun with Michael's marriage to Elena over 20 years earlier. Derek would never be family to Marcus in any meaningful sense, but he was no longer an enemy whose destruction required ongoing attention and resources. The transformation from stepbrother to stranger was complete, allowing Marcus to redirect his emotional energy toward relationships and activities that offered genuine connection and mutual benefit. The Riverside Drive properties that had once represented Elena and Derek's claim to social status and financial security became the centerpiece of Marcus's most ambitious development project. Marcus transformed the entire block into a mixed-use development that included affordable housing units, small business spaces, and community amenities that served the broader neighborhood rather than exclusively wealthy residents. The project won several regional awards for sustainable development and community integration while generating substantial profits that Marcus reinvested into additional charitable and business initiatives. Marcus's transformation from homeless college graduate to successful businessman and philanthropist demonstrated the power of systematic planning, disciplined execution, and channeling negative emotions into constructive action. The revenge against Elena and Derek had been comprehensively successful, but the lasting value of Marcus's efforts lay in the positive community impact and personal growth that had emerged from his initial motivation for justice. Elena and Derek's cruelty had inadvertently created circumstances that enabled Marcus to discover his true potential and develop the character strengths necessary for extraordinary achievement. The story concluded not with Derek and Elena's complete destruction, but with Marcus's evolution beyond the need for revenge, into a leader whose success benefited hundreds of people annually through business opportunities, housing assistance, and charitable programs. Elena and Derek had lost everything they had valued about their lives, but Marcus had gained far more than he had originally lost, transforming personal trauma into community benefit and private vengeance into public service. The ultimate victory wasn't destroying his stepfamily, but transcending the emotional limitations their cruelty had initially imposed on his life and relationships. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.